Picture this. The year is 1945. The war in the Pacific is grinding toward its final, brutal chapter. Across 1,000 islands, American soldiers carry their M1 carbines, 15 rounds of 30 caliber firepower under 5 pounds of engineered lethality. The finest personal defense weapon the United States Army had ever issued to its officers and support troops. And then there is Douglas MacArthur, 5-star General of the Army, Supreme Commander of Allied Forces in the Southwest Pacific, the man who promised he would return to the Philippines, and kept that promise. He strides ashore on liberated beaches, corncob pipe clenched between his teeth, aviator sunglasses catching the tropical glare, that battered, crushed officer's cap tilted just so. His khaki uniform is open-collared, immaculate, theatrical. He looks less like a battlefield commander and more like a living monument to American will. And on his hip, if anything at all, is not the M1 Carbine that his officers carried. Not the standard-issue sidearm of the United States military. No, what MacArthur carried, when he chose to carry anything at all, was a compact, elegant, almost aristocratic pistol. A Colt model 1903 Pocket Hammerless, a .32 caliber civilian gentleman's pistol, chambered for a round that European officers had carried since the turn of the century. A pistol that weighed less than 2 pounds fully loaded. A pistol that could disappear into a jacket pocket. A pistol that made no noise against a holster, cast no shadow on a silhouette, and disrupted nothing about the image he had spent decades constructing. The question is not simply, why did MacArthur prefer a lighter gun? The question is, what does that choice reveal about the man who made it? And what does it tell us about the strange intersection of war, image, and power at the very highest levels of military command? Stay with me, because this story goes much deeper than ballistics. And before we dive in, if you love military history told the way it deserves to be told, with honesty and depth and respect for the men who lived it, hit that subscribe button right now. This channel is built for you. To understand MacArthur's choice, you first have to understand the weapon he was choosing against. The M1 Carbine entered service with the United States Army on October 22, 1941, barely 6 weeks before Pearl Harbor. It was the answer to a problem that had haunted military planners for years. What do you give to the officer, the medic, the communications specialist, the artilleryman, the man behind the front lines who needs to defend himself but cannot shoulder a full-size rifle? The M1 Garand, the legendary battle rifle that General George Patton once called the greatest battle implement ever devised, weighed nearly 10 pounds. It was a masterpiece for an infantryman. But for a jeep driver, a radio man, a company commander moving between positions, it was a burden. The Army needed something lighter, faster, more manageable. The specifications were demanding but clear. A new light rifle weighing no more than 5 pounds, chambered for a new .30 caliber cartridge, fed from a detachable box magazine with an effective range of 300 yards. In the spring of 1941, multiple firms competed for the contract. Winchester ultimately won, and what they produced was remarkable. The M1 Carbine weighed 5 pounds, 1 ounce, unloaded, just over 2.5 kilograms when carrying a loaded 15-round magazine. It was 18 inches shorter than the M1 Garand. Its .30 carbine round flew at nearly 2,000 feet per second. It was semi-automatic, dependable, and capable of putting 15 rounds downrange before a reload. By 1945, more than 6 million had been manufactured. By Winchester, by General Motors Inland Division, by IBM, by the Rock-Ola Jukebox Company, by Underwood typewriters. No American weapon in history had ever been produced in such quantity by so many companies with so little prior firearms experience. For officers, medics, and support troops in the Pacific Theater, it was a revelation. Soldiers and guerrilla fighters operating in dense jungle praised its compact size and firepower. It outperformed the pistol and the submachine gun at ranges beyond 50 yards. In close quarters fighting across the island chains, from Guadalcanal to New Guinea to the Philippines, it gave non-combat soldiers a fighting chance. And yet, even in the Pacific, the M1 Carbine was not without its critics. Frontline troops in sustained combat, particularly in the Philippines, found its stopping power against determined Japanese soldiers to be insufficient. After-action reports noted that enemy soldiers sometimes continued fighting after multiple hits. The .30 carbine round, optimized for weight and controllability, lacked the raw kinetic force of the 30-06 cartridge in the M1 Garand. It was a compromise weapon, superb for its intended purpose, but limited when that purpose expanded beyond its design. These were real tactical concerns. MacArthur, a meticulous student of military capability, understood them, but understanding the weapon's limitations was only part of his calculation. The deeper reason MacArthur did not carry an M1 Carbine had nothing to do with its ballistics. It had everything to do with who Douglas MacArthur believed he was. Douglas MacArthur had been building his image for as long as he had been a soldier. Born in 1880 at the U.S. Army Arsenal Barracks in Little Rock, Arkansas, he was the son of Arthur MacArthur, Jr., a Medal of Honor recipient, a Civil War hero who had risen to the rank of colonel by age 19, a military governor of the Philippines. The weight of that legacy pressed down on Douglas from his earliest years. His mother, Pinky MacArthur, whispered to him as a child that he must grow up to be a great man, like his father and Robert E. Lee. He graduated first in his class from West Point in 1903. By World War I, he was a brigadier general, the youngest in the American Expeditionary Forces until two other men reached the same rank months later. And even then, even in the trenches of France, MacArthur's style was unmistakable. He did not wear a helmet. He did not carry a pistol into combat. He crossed no man's land wearing a gray turtleneck sweater, a long scarf knitted by his mother, and his officer's cap with the grommet removed so that it rode at a deliberately rakish angle. In one hand, a riding crop, nothing more. His reasoning, as biographers and historians have documented, was deliberate. MacArthur believed it was not his business to kill the enemy with his own hands. His business was to inspire other men to fight. Where he led, they would follow. And no man would follow a commander who looked frightened, who clutched a rifle like an infantryman, who wore a helmet like a man afraid of dying. He earned 6 Silver Stars in World War I. He was wounded, gassed, cited as the greatest frontline general of that war, and he went unarmed into every one of those engagements. That tradition of deliberate theatrical invulnerability never left him. By the time World War II consumed the Pacific, MacArthur had been refining this performance for 40 years. He was no longer just a general, he was a symbol. He had promised the Filipino people he would return, and he had broadcast that promise across every Allied radio frequency in the region. He had issued "I shall return" matchbooks to be delivered by submarine and parachute to guerrilla fighters hiding in the mountains. He had made himself into a legend, not just a military commander, but a psychological weapon. Legends do not carry carbines. When MacArthur waded ashore at Leyte in October 1944, fulfilling his most famous promise, snipers were still active on that beach. Mortars were still falling. The scene was dangerous, genuinely dangerous. And MacArthur strode through it with his pipe and his sunglasses and his open collar, looking for all the world like a man on a morning inspection, rather than a combat landing. That was not carelessness. That was calculation. The corncob pipe, the crushed cap, the aviator sunglasses, the open-collared uniform when regulations called for something else. Every detail of MacArthur's appearance was a message to his own troops. Your commander is unafraid. A message to the enemy: you cannot touch what you cannot intimidate. A message to the press, to the American public, to history: this man is different from other men. A bulky military carbine slung across his shoulder, or even visible in a belt holster, would have contradicted that message entirely. It would have made him look like a soldier. And by 1944, Douglas MacArthur had long since transcended the category of soldier. He had become something rarer and in some ways more powerful. A walking myth. Into this carefully constructed iconography, the Colt Model 1903 Pocket Hammerless fit with almost suspicious perfection. The pistol had been designed by John Moses Browning, the same genius who gave the world the M1911, the Browning automatic rifle, and dozens of other firearms that shaped 20th century warfare. But the 1903 was something different from Browning's military work. It was designed for discretion, for concealment, for the civilian market, for law enforcement, for the intelligence services that needed a weapon that could disappear. Introduced in 1903, the same year MacArthur graduated from West Point, the pistol was chambered in .32 ACP, a cartridge developed by Browning himself and used across Europe in officer and police sidearms. The Model 1903 featured a concealed hammer, the source of its hammerless name, though the hammer was present, simply hidden under the rear of the slide. This meant no external protrusion to catch on clothing or equipment. The lines were clean, smooth, almost sculptural. A barrel 3 3/4 inches long, an overall length of just over 7 inches. A fully loaded weight of approximately 24 ounces, just over 680 grams. It held 8 rounds in a detachable box magazine, with a grip safety and a thumb safety that allowed what modern shooters call cocked and locked carry. It could be drawn from a pocket or from beneath a belt, without snagging, without announcing itself, without disrupting the silhouette of the man carrying it. In the opening decades of the 20th century, the Colt 1903 became the choice of American sophistication. It appeared in films. It was carried by intelligence officers and police detectives. When Humphrey Bogart needed a pistol in Casablanca, in Key Largo, in The Big Sleep, he carried something very much like the 1903. The gun was not merely functional, it was stylish in a way that military weapons rarely achieved. And the United States Army recognized this quality in a specific, formal way. Douglas MacArthur first took possession of a .32 caliber model 1903 Pocket Hammerless, serial number 37213 ASU, during his tenure as superintendent of the United States Military Academy at West Point from 1919 to 1922. The pistol was presented to him, or acquired by him, during those years. It bore the hard rubber grips used before 1924, when Colt switched to checkered walnut. MacArthur's specific pistol was a commercial production example, not a military contract weapon, either privately purchased or received as a gift during his time at the Academy. That gun would travel with him through the rest of his career. By the time the United States entered World War II, the Army had recognized the Colt 1903 and its slightly larger sibling, the 1908 chambered in .380 ACP, as the appropriate sidearm for general officers. Beginning in early 1944, the Army instituted a formal practice of presenting these pistols to generals as a badge of rank. The reasoning was practical. General officers needed something that would not restrict their movement in and out of jeeps, aircraft, and command vehicles. Something that provided personal defense without impeding the constant motion of high command. Something that, as one historian of the practice noted, could function as a ceremonial weapon, a badge of status, as much as a defensive tool. The guns were issued with a fine-grade leather holster, a leather pistol belt with a gold metal clasp, a rope pistol lanyard with gold fittings, and a leather ammunition pouch. Among the generals who received these pistols during the war were Dwight Eisenhower, Omar Bradley, and George S. Patton. Patton characteristically had the stars of his current rank embellished on the grip panels. The pistol became, in the words of those who studied its history, less a combat weapon than a social weapon, something worn at ceremonies, inspections, and formal occasions. Some generals were openly dismissive of its combat utility. One general officer, quoted in Harold Greeley IV's documented history of the practice, wrote that he gave his issued Colt 380 to a junior officer in his command, preferring to carry a commercial .45 automatic instead. The Colt pocket model, in his assessment, was simply not a serious fighting pistol. But MacArthur had never been interested in a serious fighting pistol. He had proved that in the trenches of France. He was interested in something else entirely. Consider the mathematics of personal mobility at the level MacArthur operated. A supreme commander in the Pacific theater of 1944-45 was in constant grinding motion. MacArthur's headquarters moved repeatedly, from Australia to New Guinea to the Philippines. He traveled by B-17 bomber, by PT boat, by jeep, by landing craft. He inspected frontline positions, toured command centers, appeared before troops across thousands of miles of ocean and jungle. On any given day, he might climb in and out of vehicles a dozen times, board and deplane aircraft, wade through surf, walk across airstrips still within range of Japanese artillery. The M1 Carbine, for all its virtues, was still a long arm, nearly 36 inches from muzzle to buttstock. In the confined interior of a military aircraft, a jeep, a command tent, a hospital ward, a ship's companionway, it was an obstruction. It required handling. It demanded attention. It became, in the operational context of a senior commander, an encumbrance. The Colt 1903, by contrast, at just over 7 inches long and weighing less than 2 pounds, was invisible. It could ride in a belt holster beneath a jacket. It could sit in a trouser pocket. It required no handling, no consideration, no conscious management. It was simply there or not there as circumstances required. And there is something deeper still in that invisibility. MacArthur was famously proud of going unarmed in World War I. He had made a philosophy of apparent invulnerability, of appearing before his men and his enemies as a man so confident in his fate, so assured of his destiny, that the ordinary precautions of mortal men did not apply to him. When he landed at Atsugi Air Base in Japan in August 1945, stepping onto enemy soil before his troops had fully secured it, ignoring warnings of potential assassination by Japanese military holdouts, he descended the stairs of his aircraft unarmed, pipe lit, sunglasses on, moving with the unhurried confidence of a man arriving at a scheduled appointment. The absence of a visible weapon was itself a weapon. It communicated something that no firearm could, that this man did not fear you, that your power to harm him was irrelevant to his plans, that he had already decided how this story would end, and it did not end with him. A Colt 1903 tucked discreetly in a belt holster, invisible beneath his uniform jacket, preserved that image perfectly. The pistol was there for the unthinkable eventuality, the last resort, the scenario MacArthur's ego refused to acknowledge as possible. But it made no claim on the world. It demanded nothing from an observer's attention. It left the silhouette of the legend intact. An M1 Carbine could not do that. An M1 Carbine announces itself. An M1 Carbine says, "I am a soldier prepared for combat." MacArthur had already decided he was something other than a soldier prepared for combat. He was, by 1944, the Supreme Commander, and Supreme Commanders do not carry carbines. Now let us be precise about what the Colt 1903 could and could not do. The 32 ACP cartridge, also known as 7.65mm Browning, is not a powerful round by any reasonable combat standard. It generates approximately 130 foot-pounds of muzzle energy. Compare that to the 30 carbine round in the M1 Carbine, which produced roughly 967 foot-pounds at the muzzle. Compare it to the 45 ACP in the standard M1911 service pistol, which delivered approximately 370 foot-pounds. The 32 ACP is a cartridge designed for close-range personal defense in civilian and police contexts. It is effective within 10 to 15 yards. Beyond that, its performance degrades significantly. In the jungles and beaches of the Pacific, where Japanese soldiers sometimes continued fighting after multiple hits from the 30 carbine round, the 32 ACP would have been wholly inadequate for sustained combat. If MacArthur had ever found himself in a genuine firefight, surrounded, isolated, under direct enemy fire, the 8 rounds in his Colt 1903 would have offered him very little protection. He almost certainly knew this, and he carried it anyway. Because the Colt 1903 was never intended for the scenario in which it would fail. It was intended for the scenario that MacArthur's psychology refused to contemplate. The sudden, unexpected moment of personal danger. The ambush, the stray sniper, the Japanese holdout who had not received the surrender order. In that moment, the Colt was not a combat weapon. It was a last resort, a final option, the tool of a man who intended above all not to be taken alive. William Manchester, in his landmark biography of MacArthur, noted that the general was known to carry a small pistol for precisely this purpose, not to fight, but to ensure he could not be captured. That calculation was cold and deliberate. It was the reasoning of a man who understood that his symbolic value to the Allied cause and to American morale was too great to risk falling into Japanese hands. The Colt 1903, light enough to carry anywhere without effort, was adequate for that singular purpose. Everything else about MacArthur's tactical situation was handled by the concentric rings of security that surrounded a 5-star general. His aides, his bodyguard detail, the escort aircraft above his bomber, the troops that preceded him to every landing zone. MacArthur did not need a carbine because MacArthur was never supposed to be the one shooting. His weapon was his presence. The Colt 1903 Pocket Hammerless was produced by Colt Patton Firearms Manufacturing Company in Hartford, Connecticut from 1903 to 1945. Over that 42-year run, approximately 570,000 were manufactured in line 32 ACP, along with a related variant, the Model 1908, chambered in 380 ACP. They were sold to civilians, law enforcement agencies, foreign governments, and, during World War II, to the United States military. Between 1942 and 1945, the United States government purchased approximately 70,330 Model 1903 pistols and 3,113 Model 1908 pistols. Many went to the Office of Strategic Services, America's wartime intelligence agency, and the British Special Operations Executive, which used them to arm resistance groups across occupied Europe. A portion went to general officers as the formal badge of rank program, developed in 1944. The guns issued to general officers were typically engraved with the officer's name and came in a presentation set. Fine leather holster, pistol belt with gold clasp, lanyard with gold fittings, ammunition pouch. Recipients included Eisenhower, Bradley, Patton, and dozens of other senior commanders. The practice continued after the war, with Colt 1903 and 1908 pistols remaining in service as general officer sidearms until 1972. Nearly 30 years after production ended, sustained by surplus parts and careful maintenance. In 1972, the pistol was finally replaced by the Rock Island Arsenal M15 General Officer's pistol, a compact version of the M19 1A1. MacArthur's specific Colt 1903, serial number 372130, is today preserved at the National Firearms Museum, operated by the National Rifle Association. It bears the hard rubber grips of its era. It shows the wear of a life in extraordinary service. It is a small, elegant, almost self-effacing thing. And it is one of the most famous personal firearms in American military history. Not because it ever fired a shot in anger, but because of the man who chose to carry it, and the choice that carrying it represented. There is a broader tradition at work in MacArthur's preference, one that stretches across centuries of military history and into the present day. For as long as officers have led armies, the weapons they carried have served purposes beyond the tactical. The sword at an officer's side was never primarily a killing implement. It was a marker of rank, of social status, of the distance between the man who commands and the man who obeys. When swords gave way to pistols in the First World War, the tradition did not disappear. It simply changed form. Officers of high rank have always carried sidearms that signal something about who they are, not merely what they can do in a firefight. George Patton's ivory-handled Colt single-action army revolver, the peacemaker of the Old West, carried by a general in 1944, was not a practical combat choice. It was a statement. It said, "I am a fighting general. I am a warrior in the ancient tradition. I am not an administrator. I am not a bureaucrat. I lead from the front." MacArthur's Colt 1903 said something different. It said, "I am above the mechanics of combat. My business is not to kill with my own hands. My business is to shape history." This tradition persists in the 21st century. Senior military officers today carry specialized pistols. Compact, high-quality sidearms, distinct from the standard-issue weapons of the troops they command. The choice of a general officer's sidearm remains, as it was in MacArthur's time, as much a symbolic decision as a tactical one. Modern special operations commanders have been photographed carrying M1 Carbine, a weapon that communicates warrior identity rather than the standard military-issue Beretta or Sig Sauer. The message encoded in a sidearm has not changed. Only the weapons have. MacArthur understood this dynamic with an instinct that bordered on genius. He was, among many things, a master of what we would today call information warfare, the shaping of perceptions as a strategic tool. His biographers have documented how deliberately he managed his image. The staged landings, the carefully timed photographs, the theatrical arrivals at liberated cities. The corncob pipe and the aviator sunglasses were not affectations. They were props in a carefully produced drama whose audience was simultaneously his own troops, the enemy, the American public, and history itself. The Colt 1903 fit into that drama perfectly. Small enough to be invisible, elegant enough to be appropriate, old enough to carry a patina of personal history. It was the sidearm of a gentleman, not a soldier. And Douglas MacArthur, for all his combat decorations, ultimately saw himself as something more than a soldier. He saw himself as the architect of an era. Douglas MacArthur accepted the Japanese surrender aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay on September 2, 1945. He stood at the surrender table in his open-collared khaki uniform, his crushed cap, his iconic sunglasses, the same silhouette the world had come to recognize across 4 years of brutal island warfare. He made no ceremony of his weapons, no Patton-style presentation of gleaming ivory grips, no martial display. He simply signed his name 4 times, in 4 different pens distributed to 4 men who had suffered most under Japanese occupation. He spoke of the end of wars, of the need to rise to a higher dignity, and then he walked away. The war was over. The Pacific, his Pacific, was won. Somewhere beneath his jacket, almost certainly, was the Colt 1903. 8 rounds of 32 ACP, a pistol designed for gentlemen. A weapon he had carried since West Point, through the Depression, through Bataan and Corregidor, through New Guinea and Leyte Gulf, and the long return to Manila. It had never saved his life. It was never meant to. It had simply been there, discreet, disciplined, invisible, while its owner remade the world around it. MacArthur died on April 5, 1964 in Washington, D.C. He was 84 years old. He left behind a career so large and so contradictory that historians still argue about its meaning. The brilliance and the vanity, the genuine courage and the manufactured mythology, the strategic genius and the catastrophic miscalculations in Korea. He was, as one biographer wrote, a man of enormous gifts who could never quite distinguish between himself and the role he had been born to play. His Colt 1903 Pocket Hammerless, serial number 372130, sits today in a glass case at the National Firearms Museum. It is a small thing to carry the weight of such a life. But that is, perhaps, exactly the point. The greatest generals have always understood something that ordinary soldiers cannot afford to know: that the weapons most worth carrying are not made of steel. They are made of image, of myth, of the stories men tell about you when you are not in the room. Douglas MacArthur chose an elegant, understated, nearly invisible pistol over the standard military carbine of his era. He chose discretion over firepower, symbolism over stopping power, the gentleman's weapon over the soldier's tool. And in doing so, he told us more about himself and about the nature of command at its highest level than any battle map or after-action report ever could. The M1 Carbine was built for soldiers. The Colt 1903 was built for a legend. MacArthur knew which one he was. If this story moved you, if you believe that military history deserves to be told with this kind of depth and honesty, please subscribe to this channel right now. Hit the like button. Activate the notification bell so you never miss a story. Every video we produce is built on verified history, told with the respect that the men and women who lived it deserve. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.